Well, everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at three different iPhones that I probably, this is kind of how I would sum this whole entire video up. I would maybe recommend buying, the iPhone 8. I would recommend buying the iPhone 7 at a bare minimum, and I would probably not recommend buying an iPhone 6 anymore. Now, here's the thing. All these iPhones are still supported with software right now, and there's going to be a time very, very soon where these two are still going to be supported, where the 6S is not. But that doesn't necessarily mean the iPhone 6S was a bad phone. I personally do think that the 6S is one of the most impactful iPhones Apple ever made, and I do think as of right now, this device sits at a very interesting spot. This device is a living legend, and I don't think a lot of people probably remember this phone or even care about it anymore, but this device you can probably pick up for like around $90, probably more so like 60 or 70. Once it's unsupported, it's going to go down even more. I have seen, used prices of these things kind of fluctuate depending on the, build quality, also depending on, the condition of these phones. If you can find a brand new one, send it over to me, or a link to it, and I can go and purchase one because I want a brand new one for sure. But this device has one thing that these devices don't have. That's actually the headphone jack at the bottom. The 6S was actually the last iPhone to have a headphone jack, and if that's still important to you, well, you have that capability with this iPhone. Then we go to something like an iPhone 7. Now, this is going to be a more, relevant device, mostly because it's still going to be supported with software for the next probably several years. So what does that mean? Well, something like the iPhone 7 came on in 2016, the 7 and 7 Plus, no headphone jack here. It did bring a bigger battery than the iPhone 6S, which was cool. It brought, I think, a little bit of a better camera setup and everything like that. But really the main thing people remember this iPhone for is pretty much the lack of headphone jack, but it also brought a little bit of a different home button on the front. The 7, surprisingly, actually didn't have a physical button that you press in. It was actually a vibration motor, and because of that, if you replace the display, sometimes the home button, or most of the time, the home button wouldn't work. In this case, same thing happened to me. This home button here does not work, where I have to use assistive touch. But this is still a really decent iPhone. This is probably the most decent iPhone you can think of. It's probably not necessarily worth it for a lot of people out there. If you can go to something like a 2017 device, particularly the iPhone 10, that would be way better. But with something like the iPhone 7, it's still going to be supported with software right now, and it looks like it's going to be supported with software for the next couple of years too. So this device, much like the 6S, sits at another interesting spot where, I would probably recommend buying this one more than this one, but I would highly recommend going up to something like an iPhone 8 if you're in this realm. Now, even the iPhone 8 isn't perfect, but if you're looking at these devices, this one is definitely worth the money. Now, first of all, the build quality was substantially better on this device than on any of the previous generation. Why is that? Well, because we got this glass back. Mine is very, very glossy and has like a lot of fingerprints on it. But this thing actually gave us the full glass back, which felt very premium. This was at the time probably the most premium feeling iPhone Apple ever made, stemming from the iPhone 4, which was really, really cool. Now, we did have kind of the same camera setup, but we had the capability of doing 4K at 60, which was really nice. We also got IP certification on this iPhone and this iPhone, where the iPhone 6S didn't have it. It had like water resistance, but it really wasn't as crazy as you would think. But it gave us wireless charging. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of wireless charging, but at least we had the capability here, which was really cool. This was also still a very thin iPhone, and it still feels very premium. This is still a very, very premium device for sure. Now, when I play with this thing and I turn it on and I kind of mess around with it, I'm actually still surprised about the performance, I think the iPhone 10 surprises me more, but this device is still very smooth, it's still very fast, and for the most part, I really don't have too many things to complain about. On iOS 15, this thing has done a pretty good job too, but I do think this is still a very kind of relevant iPhone when it comes down to it. Now, when I look at these devices and kind of, the way they're kind of set up in 2022, I'm just left with one question, and that question is, I just don't really understand where the iPhone 7 kind of, places itself in. I know with the iPhone 6S, it's not really a phone I would recommend buying anymore. It's pretty much the bare minimum, and even that I wouldn't recommend. The iPhone 7 right now is that bare minimum, but even with this device in the used market and everything like it, it really, I've seen so many of these things prices at such a higher level than I would normally expect. So if I even go over here and if I just type in iPhone 7, we can just take a look, and I know I misplaced it or mistyped it, but there's still, I guess $200 on Walmart. We can even look over here. There's some of them or whatever, right? But even $200, and that's a used one. There's no way that's right. So I guess we can look right here. There's eBay for about $163 and different things like that. I think when it comes down to it, that's kind of an overprice to pay for something like this. I wouldn't pay 160 something dollars. You can pick up an iPhone SE 2 for about that same price. So there really isn't a point of picking up this device, and that's why I think it's a little bit more complicated. When I look at this iPhone, right, the one before it, definitely I wouldn't recommend buying it. If you own it, that's a different story right now. If you're planning on buying it, I just wouldn't really recommend getting it anymore. I mean, it's kind of overpriced and it's going to be outdated very soon. When I look at the iPhone 8, this is another device that I would kind of recommend buying, but like I would just go straight for the iPhone 10, which was the same year, so it's kind of the same internals, but this is still a decent phone. The 7, on the other hand, it's still going to be supported with software, potentially with iOS 16. But I look at this device and I would say this is the bottom of the bottom. This is the lowest I would recommend buying. But I think with something like the iPhone 7, this isn't even an iPhone I would probably recommend most people to buy. I would recommend going for something like the 7 Plus if you can, or the Plus model of the iPhone 8 Plus. That would be amazing. That would be a really, really good phone. But with this one, on the other hand, I'm just kind of stuck in a situation where I think it's way more similar to an iPhone 6S than it is with an iPhone 8. So it is almost like a middle child in a way. But I just look at this iPhone and I'm like, it's still going to be around for the next year or two, but I just don't know how this one is going to be placed at. It doesn't really seem like a good deal, especially if it's around $150. You could probably get it for like 100 if you actually look hard enough. But I think with something like the iPhone 8, this device is substantially better than the iPhone 7 in most areas. I know that the battery size was bigger on the iPhone 7, but the iPhone 8's build quality is really good, and I think we all can agree that the iPhone 6S really isn't worth it anymore either. But the speed differences I've seen going from a 6S to an 8 are actually pretty high. You're definitely getting a better performing phone. All these devices have the same amount of RAM though inside of them, which is something that probably some people forget, but you are getting the same amount of RAM. But you have the A9 chip here, or you have the A11 Bionic here, you have the A10 Fusion here. So there's just different names all across the board, but the iPhone 8 is going to be the faster one overall, which is really good too. How much faster is it? Well, it really depends. I mean, if I do a quick thing, I can't even do a quick comparison here, but I've done several gaming comparisons on my third channel, just kind of looking at heavy intensive gaming. I played Genshin Impact, all of them pretty much. As you can see, I don't even have Genshin Impact here. Because the iPhone 6s base model was 16 gigabytes and it started with 32 here and I think 64 here, that's another really big difference. I always have to delete apps on my iPhone 6s because I'm always running out of storage. Whereas on something like an iPhone 7, as you can see, I have Genshin Impact, I have Call of Duty, and I have PUBG, and I'm not really running out of storage yet. On my iPhone 8, on the other hand, 64 gigabytes here. So I can have all these, apps like Genshin Impact and PUBG, but I can also have a lot of these other applications too, and I'm not really running out of storage. So if you're somebody who wants to get even a better value per dollar, and you're definitely going to be getting a better value per dollar with this higher storage model that you get. So 64 gigabytes here, 32 here. So I would definitely tell you that's another example of why I would recommend buying something like an iPhone 8, maybe even an iPhone 7, but definitely not the iPhone 6s. It just does not make any sense to purchase this phone, especially because 16 gigabytes of storage is just like nothing nowadays. You can see I only look at what I have on this phone. I have nothing on this phone basically. I don't even think I have barely any photos, and half of my storage is taken up with like system data and like iOS or something. So that's why you need as much storage as possible. And that's why I would really recommend not buying an iPhone 6s. You can get a higher end storage model of the 6s, but even at that point, just doesn't make any sense in my opinion. So that's kind of how all these iPhones situate, let alone there's, storage and everything. The pricing structure is very different right now. And I would not recommend buying an iPhone 6s. Maybe the iPhone 7 is okay, but the iPhone 8 is the better one here for sure. But I would recommend getting an iPhone 10 if you have the ability to. So that's kind of how all these phones compare right now in 2022. If you have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.